Welcome to our MOOC on Indian economy, policy and environment. We are in the 7th week and now I'm going to discuss the unit number 4 under module 7, which is emerging trends and issues of industrialization in India. Before I start today's session, let me very briefly give a kind of background that we have already gone through during this week. We have discussed some of the salient features of industrialization in India and also examined the public sector enterprises, its role, its significance, how it emerged to be one of the key driving force of Indian economy since independence, along with discussion on industrial policies pursued since independence. Let me try to recall some of the key points that we have discussed so far in order to put the things in proper perspective. We have followed a kind of broad approach in industrialization in India. In some of the key themes of that approach can be discussed as something like this. When we became independent, India recognized the importance of industrialization both for economic growth and employment. However, initial focus on India's industrialization was on basic and capital goods industries. It started with developing India's potential for basic and capital goods industries, and then subsequently it tried to develop the consumer goods sector. Within this broad approach, the public sector played a pivotal role and then encouraged privatization, participation of private players in the industrial sphere. We began with import substitution, and for that we wanted to have a set of protections to promote and develop the domestic industries. At the same time, India was trying to develop the country within the framework of balanced economic growth, and for that we have had our policies related to industrial dispersal so that different parts of the country can see different industries and industrializations. And we started with public sector enterprises playing a very key and decisive role in this framework, and then gradually we tried to sort of protect and promote micro, small and medium enterprises coming from diverse range of private initiatives. And within different policies and different programs, India tried to provide support, incentives to these private MSMEs, along with a key role that was supposed to be played by public sector enterprises. Economy became more outward looking during the phase of globalization, that's starting with the second part of 1980s, and then full-blown globalization we have seen in 1990s. And when that happened, there was a gradual rolling back of the public sector. We have gone for systematic disinvestment, and it also encouraged a kind of greater participation of private sector during the 90s and after that. And for that we had series of reforms which actually was targeting liberalization. And then during the entire period we have seen technology, innovation, productivity taking place significantly, and we have also seen that employment elasticity was varying from years to years. At the end of 2000, a decade of 2000 and so, the employment elasticity has become stagnant. At times it is negative. So therefore we have had sort of growth, but at the same time we did not have enough employment generated by this process of growth, including industrialization. And we have seen recent emphasis on self-reliance, such as Make in India, Startup India, Skill India, etc. Different programs, flagship, the schemes are coming up, and we have sort of, again trying to develop our own potential in the, in a sphere of the self-reliance. So this is in a nutshell we have already discussed, and these points sum up the discussion that we have so far. Now today we are going to discuss three basic things for this session. The first point that we will try to discuss today is what are the broad trends of industrial development in the country, particularly which we witness in the recent times, and what are the major issues related with overall industrial scenario in the country, and then finally perhaps we will be sort of outlining the kind of reform that we can envisage within the broad trends and issues that we will be identifying. So these are the main themes of discussion today, and we will try to take these things forward. Now let me begin by putting this graph before you, which provides two things. One is the trend of industrial growth, and at the same time the share of GDP of the industry and in general, including manufacturing, in the total gross domestic product. And we have taken the time frame from 1950-51 to 2004-5. The red line that you are seeing is the industrial growth curve during this period, and we have plotted a kind of trend line which is around 5%. On an average, the industrial growth rate in the country has been around 5 to 6% during the entire stretch of the period. The blue bars represent the share of GDP of the industry, and it started with around 14-15% in the 50-51, which is doubled over the years, and today we are having around 29%. So 1/3 of the GDP comes from the industrial sector in India today, which was just 50% or below 50% in 1950s. And the growth, however, is fluctuating, but on an average it is about 5%. So what we see in this graph can be summed up in 3 points. That there is no clear upward or downward trend in the growth. So it is mixed with a lot of ups and downs in between. However, the long-term growth since 1950-51 to 2004-5 is positive, but average rate is not really significant, average annual growth being around 5%. Contrarily, the share of industry in GDP has increased about twofold during the period of 50-51 to 2004-5, from 14.8% to 28.8%. Now, the industrial sector is composed of 3 major sets of industries, what we call basic industries. Now, basic industries include 8 very core industrial sector in the country, which includes coal, crude oil, natural gas, refinery products, fertilizers, steel, cement and electricity. And these basic industries are composed of about 40% of the weight in the index of industrial production. So if we look at the cumulative annual growth rate of industrial production, index of industrial production during the 50s till 2020, in terms of basic industries, that is, which includes the 8 industries as I have suggested, you will get a kind of graph like this, and the blue line gives you a kind of downward, slightly downward sloping graph, and the red line is indicating a kind of trend that is there, which is declining trend. So basic industries are declining, the industrial production index, the annual growth rate of industrial production in basic industries are declining, but you get 2 phases here, 1950 to 1960, where basic industries have shown improvement from 4% to 12% growth, and then 90 to 95, again there is a growth from 3.8 to 9.6%. But long-term growth is declining. The basic industries, as I have suggested, that it included the major PSEs, public sector undertakings, and enterprises during the 50s, early 50s, and it showed a kind of growth that was there, but gradually that was declining, and today we are having around 3-4% growth rate in industrial production of the basic industries. The 2 things are important. One, that initial phase, the industries, basic industries have shown a growth of around 3 times from 4 to 12, and in between early 90s, owing to reform that period, we have got that spike in the growth rate, and then however gradually this was showing some decline. All right. The second component of industry is the capital goods, and I have said that all the capital goods sector, if we look at the industrial production index, then you get this graph, where again the long-term growth rate from 50 to 2020 will be declining. Where I have identified 2 phases again for basic and capital goods, that during the period of 50s and 60s, capital goods industries, where public sector, as I have shown in the graph, was playing a dominant role during that period, shown, expanded, and again, 80s, late 80s, 90s, mid 90s, you get that kind of a situation. Again, there's a hike, but after that there's a decline, or at least stagnation, in capital goods industrial production index, and you get long-term downward curve. More interestingly, if you look at the consumer goods, as I have said, that broad pattern indicates that initial phase it was actually the industries which are dominated by basic and capital goods, dominated by public sector enterprises, and gradually that was also generating kind of the private initiative, MSMEs are coming up, mostly producing consumer goods. So therefore this graph gives you the index of industrial production of the consumer goods, and we get a picture from 1950s to 2020 again, but here you will see that the consumer goods sector was increasing from 1980s to 2000, and then again consumer goods also was declining, and most importantly the red line gives you the kind of production that was taking place in the durables. Now durables includes the automobiles, the electricities, electrical appliances, and so on and so forth. So the durables were also showing or following the same pattern. So 80s to 2020 around, it was expanding, it was showing growth, but then slightly it was coming down. So during this phase you get the expansion of private sector, you get expansion of medium, micro and small enterprises, and after liberalization you are also seeing entry of multinational corporations in consumer goods sector, taking these things growth of consumer goods sector to a new height. So that is the period of 20-25 years where we have seen that industrial production in consumer goods, including durables, were increasing. So combining all these, if we try to get a kind of general index for industrial production, then we will see something like this. This graph also predicts a kind of long-term deceleration. So the issue or trend that we see today is that, in initial period there was an increase in the capital and basic goods, 50s and 60s, mid 60s, followed by expansion of the consumer goods from 80 to 2000. But in the long run, if we see across the industrial sector, that is basic, capital or consumer goods, general index of industrial production is actually showing a decline. So there is a general deceleration we witness as a broad trend despite all policy and reforms and initiatives. So that's something very important to understand. Then why is it that industrial production or industrial sector in general is not accelerating as it should have been? So that's the question that we need to answer. The other point which was identified during my discussion of the background was that you have started with a policy for import substitution so that you can curtail your import, you can increase your export. And I have given this graph which provides export relative to import, that is what is the percentage you are exporting and what is the percentage you are importing. If you are importing more, then this will go down. If you are importing less and export is high, then this curve will go up. So you have this value from 1950 to 2025, and then you will see that we have slightly marginally upward kind of thing. And initial phases during the basic and capital good industries expansion period, that is till mid 60s, this ratio was actually declining, and then we were trying to, because import was more, then we tried to import substitute, and export we expanded, which happened till around 80s. This graph goes up, and that was the phase when we were seeing that probably the India's growth can be an export-led growth. That was a debate during 1970s when we see the growth debate in India, that what could be a major source, whether it is domestic demand or it is an export that can be seen as the drivers of economic growth in the country. So that it gives a kind of two things. One, it shows the import substitution that was trying to be achieved, and we have seen a kind of export-led growth during a phase of 1965 to 1975 or so, around 20 years or so. We are seeing that growth was driven by the export increased relative to import, and then it stagnated, and then we are now seeing that export and import is now declining. So therefore we are importing more than probably we are exporting. So this is in terms of export and import. All right, and I have given this the table to just to give you a sense that what is the major manufacturing sector, which is a major core manufacturing industries, starting from food products to the furnitures, woods, textile, handloom. And you look at the last 2 years, that there was a decline in all the sectors. Not really you get a very high growth in any of the manufacturing sector, and overall manufacturing sector was declining from 21, 22, 23, that it was 11.8, then 4.7, and then 5.5. So it was not, as I have said, it was actually predicting the same thing, suggesting the same thing, that it is overall there was a gradual decline. All right, so that's the point that we need to understand. Now, the another thing that we have to keep in mind here is that annual survey of industries data, and I have given from 2016-17 to 2021-22, the number of factories, the increase, the percentage number of factories, it's not really increasing. Registered factories under annual survey of industries, it's a very marginal, it's about 1% or less than 1% increase. Number of workers is not really increasing either, that is around the 8%. Number of employees is not showing any increase either, it's very minimal, but profits remarkably has increased. So it was 5% in 2016, which gone up to 30% in 2021 and 54.8% to 2021-22. So the factories are not increasing, the workers are not increasing, employees are not increasing. So therefore we do not have a kind of employment elasticity as expected, that industrial sector is going to give you growth. At the same time, it is also going to give you kind of employment. These are the two reasons. Neither of these two, that growth is decelerating, it's not contributing much to the growth across all the sectors, basic, capital or consumer goods, within manufacturing, all 23 categories of industries. At the same time, it is not being able to produce enough employment because workers and employees growth rate is also very, very low. But the profits of these industries are increasing. So this shows a kind of accumulation that is happening within the industries. And even if, more interestingly, even if that is happening, profit is there, the factories or industries are not coming up in real sense of the term. So that's the picture that we have got from this data. Now let me come to, we have discussed the trends. Now let me try to understand and make sense of these trends. How do we understand this industrial deceleration that we witness over such a long period, and more prominently during the last couple of years? We have seen that there is a deceleration. We have also seen that low employment elasticity, it's not increasing. However, technological innovation has been there. There is a total factor of productivity increase. 1990 to 97, it was 0.25. If you look at the data, and then this has gone up, total factor of productivity from 2002 to 2008, 1.41. So therefore, it's increasing, and that is actually helping the accumulation of profit, as I have shown. But the most importantly, when this profit is happening, the accumulation can be translated into investment, but it is not happening. And then only the number of industries will increase, and when that will happen, the employment will increase, the workers will increase, and then you will get some shares of wage coming up, but this is not happening. Two explanations are provided for this industrial deceleration. One is the global recession that has been there from 2008 onwards. There is an argument that since 2008, since there is a global recession, so we are not getting the export demand as we should have get. So that's one reason, the low export demand coming from outside due to global recession since 2008 is one explanation that has been offered to understand the industrial deceleration that we have seen in this discussion. Most importantly, there is another argument that not only the export demand is falling, but at the same time there is a contraction in the internal demand as well. There is not enough aggregate demand coming up in the economy, and this is due to a general decline in the real income or purchasing power of people. And I have taken this point in my last discussion on industrial, when we were discussing the agriculture, that when agriculture is not doing well, the people are coming out of agriculture to other sectors. Other sectors are seeing surplus labor. It actually provides a kind of suppressing force for the general wage level, and this is one reason that it is coming in a very big way, that there is a general decline in the real income, because of which there is not enough internal demand which can actually sustain the consumer goods sector. Because now, as I have said, that focus or the major part is from the consumer goods sector. The initial phase was basic and capital goods, but after that, what we have done, that we have privatized, we have liberalized, so we are dependent on export demand. We are also dependent on the demand for consumer goods, and that can only happen, and that really happened during the early phase of reforms, when a new middle class emerged as owing to some of the benefits of the reform, and that actually accelerated the consumer goods sector from 90 to 2000. That's no more, and so therefore we are having a general decline in real income and purchasing power of people So there is a contraction in internal demand. Now, the stagnant income of the masses are also reflected in India Wage Report 2018, that it shows that annual average growth rate of India during 93 to 2011 has been just 3%. Agriculture 3.9%, non-agriculture 2.7%, and then Reba Buru gives a growth of the farm sector wage at less than 1% and non-farm sector even less than that. So when you have a suppression in the general income of the masses, then we will not have enough demand coming up within the economy, which can actually sustain this kind of industrialization or this kind of industrial growth which is coming from the durables of the consumer as well as non-durables from it. So therefore, the main point is this. And then many other graphs will also show you the stagnation of income, which is actually evidence. It is actually showing that income is not growing. Because of which we have seen this kind of a distribution. I have given this picture just to give you that how the top 10% and middle 40% income shares in 1951 to 2014, and you see that green curve is falling, which indicates the middle level income of 40%, and the saffron curve, that is the top 10% people, it is increasing. That is the profit is their income, and the wages, the green curve, represents the wages. So share of profit is increasing, and it was indicated in ASI data also, and then share of the wages or general income level is actually declining. So this in a nutshell gives you a kind of sense that what is exactly happening with the country, what are the broad trends, and the issue is that industrial development is not happening. On the contrary, there is an industrial deceleration. So let me sum up today's discussion with 4 major takeaways. One is that the recent trend suggests that there is an industrial deceleration in India, and that has become more prominent during the last couple of years. We have understood that 2 factors are important in understanding this deceleration. The one is the reduction in the export demand owing to the global recession starting with mid-2000 onwards, and also there is a contraction in the internal demand which is not being able to sustain the industrial development within the country, particularly the consumer goods sector, owing to the stagnation or falling real income of the masses. So therefore, the most important point that we would like to highlight today is that supply side reforms alone can no longer provide the required impetus for the industrialization. It needs a demand side augmentation. Unless and until we consider demand side augmentation, providing the incentives, the support, or the other kinds of the measures to industries to increase the supply, it's not going to give you the kind of impetus that we look for. Already these are having enough inventories, so there is no lack of supply is there. Capacity is already there, underutilized. So therefore, what we need more demand side augmentation. And lastly, I would conclude with this, that possible reform must address these concerns, that unless and until we talk about the increasing the aggregate demand within the economy, this is going to be a far cry if we want to have the industrial development in the country. And this reform, the possible reform, what kind of reform will be required, that we will discuss in the last week of this MOOC, when we will be talking about the reforms, economic reforms in the country, and what future vision or what kind of reform that we probably we should look for in the future. So with this, thanking you all, I end today's session. Thank you very much.